Tonight we're going to talk about the ins and outs of IEPs and 504 plans. So I'm going to explain what a 504 plan is, the difference between a 504 plan and an IEP. So how do you know what your child needs? It really is a fork in the road between going the 504 route or the IEP route. That doesn't mean that if you go the 504 route, you're always on that path. Sometimes children move from a 504 plan to an IEP. And it can even happen vice versa. A child's on an IEP, moves to a 504 plan. But there's some important distinctions that you need to be aware of. First of all, the IEP requires specialized instruction. I'm going to go into that in a little more detail in a minute. But basically, you're changing the program. It's something that you can't really get in the general education setting. So you're changing the content of the instruction or the methodology of the instruction, or you're changing how it's delivered. So you're taking that general education setting and saying, you know, it can't just be modified or accommodated. We need something more, something different. So typically children that have higher needs would be on an IEP. The 504 plan, on the other hand, only requires equal access. That's the whole goal of a 504 plan, is what kinds of accommodations or modifications do we need so that child can access the general ed curriculum, can access the school. So, for example, let's take a child with orthopedic needs in a wheelchair. That child needs access to the classrooms through, for example, wheelchair ramps, or the auditorium, or the playground. That is an accommodation or modification so that child who has a disability can access the school itself. You're not really changing the program that the child has. You're just giving them access. And with those modifications or accommodations, that student can access the general education program. So in order to be on a 504 plan, you do need to be eligible. But it's a pretty broad eligibility standard. The student has to have a physical or mental disability. And secondly, that disability impairs them substantially and it limits a major life activity. So let's talk about some of the possibilities. It could be things like an allergy issue. A child who has peanut allergy, maybe there's a 504 plan to address that. So the school ensures that there's no peanuts in any of the cafeteria foods or any of the snacks that the children may receive. Or maybe at the nurse's office there's, an EpiPen, something like that. So that child could be on a 504 plan and accommodated in that way. But again, we're not changing the content of the instruction. That child gets the same program as their peers. Nothing else has changed. Or maybe a child has asthma. Or maybe they have ADHD or ADD, but it's mild. Since we're talking about CHAD here for kids with ADD or ADHD, if they have a mild case of that, they may not need special education. Maybe they just need some accommodations like front row seating, or maybe extra test time, or taking tests in a quiet room. That's not really changing the general ed curriculum or instruction. You're basically just accommodating so they can access what the other kids access. So it's very much a broader eligibility than an IEP. And those accommodations and modifications can be accomplished in the general education setting. So just going through some examples of situations where a child might have an accommodation or a 504 plan. Maybe they have adjusted classwork or homework. Maybe that homework or classwork is reduced for that child. Maybe they have standing permission for school nurse visits. Maybe the general education student has to go to the teacher has to contact the office has to contact the school nurse, and there's all these steps. But maybe for a child that has some kind of health concern, the student can just notify the teacher that that student needs to see the school nurse. And so it's a shortcut, and it can be in the plan. Or extended testing times, or taking tests in a separate quiet space, or receiving less homework, or front row seating to prevent distraction. So those are all examples of accommodations or modifications in the general education classroom that could be accomplished through a 504 plan.